everyone. Thank you again for joining Tenbound. Just to go over a few housekeeping. Just a reminder that the sessions are being recorded and replays will be available after the event is over. And to follow us on social at Tenbound. So for any questions, please drop them in the Q&A section on the right side where it says conversations, and there's a Q&A tab. And we will get to them probably closer to the end of the sessions. So without further ado, it is William Tyree, the CMO of ringDNA, and Joe Wisniewski, the Director of Inside Sales at ringDNA. Take it away, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. I really appreciate it. Well, welcome in, everybody. Looks like we got a great crowd today. And we're here today because we conducted a research project surveying over 2,000 sales leaders and reps to find out how coaching happens today, whether it's working or not, what the top challenges are, what technologies are helping. But I think first, we want to ask the question, why now? Why did we go to all this trouble to do this? And I think we're seeing a lot of things in the marketplace that are a little bit troubling, but are completely, overcomable, if you will. One is reps have less engagement than ever, right? Reps are having about half the quality conversations that they had a decade ago. So, Joe, I think you would agree that reps cannot afford to miss any shot that they have.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I know that in 2021, this is going to drop even more, right? You've got folks taking finally well-deserved vacations after a year and a half in their bedrooms in some instances, like in my case, where they've converted them into offices. And that's going to continue to drop this year. As I know, my sales dev teams, my SDRs, they are getting all kinds of autoresponders as we speak, as we head into summer.
That's right. Also the labor market, I'm sure everybody out there who's hiring, who's looking for jobs, that the labor market is absolutely nuts right now. It is bonkers. People are quitting jobs at record rates. And, I really feel like companies need to deliver quality mentoring to reduce churn and increase morale. Joe, you have something that you like to say that you try to give to your reps in that environment.
Oh yeah, for me, I have to really step up my coaching program, really. Not just my coaching game, not just a one-off kind of thing, but an entire program that takes them from the basics of objection handling, but all the way up to, frankly, learning business acumen, right? I want my SDRs to come across as trained, well thought out, like consultants versus just a typical SDR. And in order to do that, I've really got to basically kind of give them almost like a free MBA in my program. How do you understand not only your prospect, but your prospect's customers is a whole other level versus just simply teaching somebody how to count or send me an email. They're very important, both of them, but I got to take people along that journey.
Absolutely. And finally, technology is here to scale effective coaching, and the best companies are taking advantage, as we'll see. So without further ado, let's dig into the research. We're going to get some quick takeaways, talk about what's behind the numbers, and then go to Q&A. So first takeaway, don't prioritize reactive coaching. Focus on scheduled, data-driven coaching instead. And let's look at the numbers behind that, because I thought this was a little bit surprising. Joe, I think what we see here is we asked reps and sales leaders, is your coaching effective or not? And based on your answer, what are you doing? How are you prioritizing coaching, right? And the big difference here is, surprisingly, I think less effective coaching environments are when leaders are putting more emphasis on reps who are specifically asking for coaching versus regularly scheduled coaching that may or may not be data-driven. What's your thought on this, Joe?
Yeah, my thought on this is I'm not totally shocked, because for a lot of managers, they are constantly running from one fire to another, right? Their day looks like there are 5 fires and they only have enough water to put out 2, and they've got to pick which one. And in that prioritization, what ultimately ends up happening is, I'm going to let my reps reach out to me when they want coaching. And it's easier for a manager to kind of say that's okay, because folks are being proactive, they want to grow, they're coming to me, and then I'm helping them out. It feels good in the moment. And look, some vulnerability here. I'm guilty of this at times in my sales career. I think every manager, frankly, is. But the results are clear on how ineffective it can be, because a lot of reps, especially in a remote world, they're not going to admit to you that they need help. right? You can't just walk by their desk and see it like you could before and potentially get them to have you ask, hey, can I get some help? That's not going to happen right now. So that 17% really, really stood out to me as unsurprising, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the second thing is don't coach on random data. And I'm this is, confessional time. 70% of all sales coaching is not data driven. To me, that was a little bit shocking. Well, let's look in the numbers here in terms of what we mean by that. So this was a little bit of a trick question, right? We gave people a bunch of possible answers. One is, and this is kind of disheartening, random data is the basis for most sales coaching, but then by recent calls, that's also almost 32%. That's pretty much random data. And here's what I liken this to. This is like, if you were a sports recruiter and, somebody called you up and said, hey, you got to see somebody, and come evaluate them and see if you want to recruit them for your team. It's like showing up to one game or maybe two games and not looking at any other sports analytics or stats that we have available to us today. In other words, it's like sports recruiting in the 90s. Anyway, that I just have this visceral reaction to this, but at the same time, I know also not everybody, has the ability to do it any other way. Joe, what's your response to this?
Yeah, the way I would translate this is a typical manager might have a team of 10 or more people, right? And they're trying to do at least 30 minutes of one-on-ones with each member of that team a week. So frankly, about a whole business day might be devoted to those one-on-ones over the course of an entire week, right? And a lot of times when I'm helping out other managers in the course of our role here at ringDNA or talking with our customers, what I find is that a lot of managers are frantically trying to figure out what to say in their one-on-one about 2 minutes before it starts. Right? It'd almost be the equivalent of you and I looking at this deck right when we were in the training session right before this for 10 minutes before we jumped into the keynote. That's what's happening all the time with most one-on-ones.
Wait, isn't this what just happened?
Right? And basically what ends up occurring, right, is that manager is going to think, all right, I have 2 minutes to prep for this one-on-one. I'm going to look at the most recent call and I'm going to grab it. I'm going to hit play and hopefully something revealing comes up and I can give that person a great experience. And if it is revealing, no one knows how close that was to kind of being an agendaless one-on-one, if you will. So I can see why that random one is so big, given, again, that fire comment I made before on how stretched thin most sales managers are.
100%. And look, we're going to go through some more actionable takeaways in just a few minutes here, but just to linger on this one once more, like what's a best-in-class scenario for not using random data for you right now?
Yeah, for me right now is I know I'm going to be busy. I know things are going to come up. So I love being able to use the keywords and transcriptions on every call and automatically have libraries populate for me based on when, say, we won against a particular competitor of ringDNA. So I have a library of all the wins against competitor X and all the losses on phone calls against competitor X. So when I need to jump in and take a look at those, I'm going to be guided to the right place without having to sit there and just listen to a bunch of MP3 files beforehand. So if you have that ability with transcriptions, take 5 minutes in your system of choice and build out those libraries on a quiet Friday afternoon, because that's going to save you when the chaos of Monday comes at you after a good weekend.
Okay, I'll go one further. And look, I'm not managing reps myself now, but I have managed reps in the past. I'm definitely guilty in the past of, listening to, say, like previous 3 calls and things like that. But right now, though, what I do is I get alerts, though, just automatically AI-powered surfaced alerts that come to me. And guess what? I use those with my marketing team. So, for example, if we have, I have alerts set up and say, hey, anytime competitor X is mentioned, right? And I will actually, so they're surfaced immediately for me, and then I'll actually go through and listen to those with members of my product marketing team so that they can actually understand, what's working and what's not working. Okay, third thing, don't forget about remote reps at critical career stages. So this is interesting. This one really did surprise me. Moving to remote work, how much more coaching do you receive? And the result was actually people felt like there was less coaching. And this is specifically coming from the reps themselves. Reactions to this?
Yeah, this goes back to a cold call one of my reps sent to me, and the manager was like, "Oh yeah, I coach all the time," and they happen to be back in the office. And my SDR asks, "Well, what do you mean?" And he's like, "Yeah, we just give them a quick prep speech, and we see if someone's looking a little down and out on the sales floor, and then we zero in on that person." Like, so much of the coaching cultures of teams were built around a sales floor, right? And when everything transitioned, what I think happened was, a lot of managers either thought to themselves, "Oh, I'll be able to handle this. I have all this data coming in, right? I have all these recordings. I have all this information," but it was information overload, right? It was too much data. They didn't have a way to identify that signal in the noise. And as a result, coaching started to drop, right? I could convince myself that I had a tool to do it, but then maybe I didn't really maximize that tool and that coaching wasn't delivered. I've seen that time and time again in our conversations with a lot of folks.
That makes sense. And, I think that, as we've seen the labor market, the future really is probably for most companies a hybrid. There are definitely some companies in there that are insisting on reps being in-house again. But for the most part, I think if you're an SDR manager, the majority of your career is going to be people who some of whom you might see on the sales floor and some people who might be a world away from you. So I think definitely some good takeaways there from this research.
Oh, that's a good point.
This is related. How often do scheduled coaching sessions actually happen? And this is related to what we just talked to, right? You're a busy sales manager. You're running from one fire to the other. And what we see is they don't probably happen as much as they need to. But if you want to make sure that you hold on to those good reps that you have the opportunity to grow them, cultivate them, hopefully promote them, to be AEs at some point, you really need this, right?
Oh yeah, the second you cancel a one-on-one with someone and don't reschedule it like the same day or the next day, or don't have a very clear reason why, I mean, you're losing trust with that member of your team instantly, right? And if you do it twice, that's a breaking point. And I think a lot of folks don't understand the emotional impact that can have on an SDR who's sitting alone in their bedroom making 100 cold calls a day and only winning 2% of the time, right? I don't think we underestimate, I should say, that emotional impact it has on reps when you cancel a meeting and you're doing it not in person, when it's remote. And I think that will continue even as people return to the office. Like, it is super important to make sure that this actually happens. And if you ever have to reschedule, make it later that day. That shows how important it is to the rep. I
totally agree. All right, next, reinforce training with AI-powered real-time coaching. We touched upon this a little bit, but let's look at the data here. So we see a pretty clear delta between effective coaching arenas where there is a real-time AI-powered coaching solution in place and one where there isn't. It's pretty stark. So for those not familiar with the technology, what is that?
Yeah, so on my end, I think a lot of people hear real time and they think a sales manager sitting on some kind of whisper or listen function, manually hearing each one. When we say real time here, what we actually mean is conversation guidance from an AI going through that call. And when a certain particular keyword comes up, I'm able to display a battle card in the dialer to give that rep guidance throughout the call. At ringDNA, we call it Yoda AI, but our big focus allows me to do something really simple. I run a training, and then afterwards, I'm able to create a battle card to reinforce whatever I trained on every single call when it happens in context. I think that's the critical word here, is context, right? It's one thing to just have a generic battle card, but one of our pre-qualification questions, for example, is, do you use Salesforce, right? If you don't use Salesforce, you can't use ringDNA. And with every new SDR, I used to have to just constantly remind them, ask about Salesforce over and over again. Now all I do is I set up a trigger, a notification to come up, where if the word Salesforce isn't said in the first 60 seconds or so, they're going to get a reminder to say it. And when they say it, it goes away. I fire and forget, and I'm done, right? I launch that trigger and I move on. And I don't have to constantly train on it over time as a result.
Yeah, that's a great example. I think that obviously conversation guidance based on what is said is an important thing. Content delivery, for me as a marketer, we're always delivering things that we hope that the sales team will use. It can also be used for that. So, for example, big name competitor. Let's say, everybody is asked, every SDR is asked about, competitors, especially on cold calls. And I think for a new rep, really having something where it's surfaced and here's the talking points, and maybe here's even content that the marketing team has delivered that you might want to send people right after the call, or a case study or something like that. Those are two super common use cases for this. So really helpful. And in terms of your team, Joe, is it helping you get more meetings, more pipeline, per call, so to speak?
It is. I mean, nothing makes me more happier than bringing up like one of our newer SDRs, Dana, and seeing the number of times these notifications are going off start to decrease, right? So watching her master basic pre-qualification questions, because Salesforce isn't firing off, she knows to ask it. And then I can continue to level her up to start asking really great, more detailed questions like, hey, how are you coaching your reps, right? If she doesn't ask that question, she's going to get reminded, and that's going to really come off differently compared to most sales calls. And as a result, she's going to be more likely to book a meeting.
That sounds awesome. Well, just one more quick thing here, and then we're going to take some QA. And also for anyone who's interested in the research, it's a big piece of research. There's a lot of data in there. We're happy to share it to you for free. So I'll put that URL up at the end here. So the last thing is we straight up just asked people, gave them a list of a bunch of choices, what's your top priority as it pertains to sales coaching? And the number one was scaling, right? And we've talked about that in terms of, like, I've known, sales managers that just felt like they didn't have time to do coaching before and didn't feel like they could really scale it. But I think as we're seeing the combination of kind of this perfect storm of things with the labor market and lower engagement, it just seems like, like figuring out a way to scale, whether it's through programs that you institute, discipline, or even some combination of technology and all of the above, is a top priority. Are you hearing the same thing out there? Is this surprising to you?
I was actually surprised. I would have expected this would have just been sales coaching is the number one priority, right? A manager trying to catch up and implement a program. But the mistake in rushing to make a program is you build it in a way that isn't scalable, and it's relying on you to run the trainings, you to run the role plays, you to do all the work. And it'll feel great the first 2 weeks, but inevitably you're going to have more fires catch up with you that you can't put out, that you need to work on something else. And that program is going to start to suffer and it'll burn out. So I was shocked that scaling was in here, that folks are already 2 steps ahead. They don't want to just build a program. They want to actually scale it so it can work without them all the time. And that made me really excited to see that, primarily because, again, like, given how competitive the SDR job market is, every one of your SDRs on this call, they're probably getting at least 5 pings on LinkedIn from a recruiter, right? Over and over again. That's just the market we're in. And if your coaching program doesn't exist, or it's only going after, like, telling a 1-year SDR who's been in your role for 12 months how to handle the same objection, they're going to get bored of that, right? They want something more. They want to get that business acumen, that like free MBA we spoke about earlier, so they can level up their skills to actually become an AE.
100%. Oh, awesome. It looks like we're getting some questions in here. So the first question, Joe, is, what's the best method and channel for SDRs to receive feedback from coaches?
So I'm an all of the above kind of person, right? I think if you just pick one channel, you're leaving yourself really, really vulnerable. So that's why I always advocate that you do it in one-on-ones, like in person over Zoom as much as possible. You do it through some kind of, coaching tool. For us, that's Conversation AI, where I can leave annotations. I like to give it over Slack and other channels. So I try to do it amongst all 3, in person, over Zoom, in some kind of training program.
Absolutely. Awesome. And I think next one I see coming through here is, do you think group coaching is effective for SDRs these days? Because obviously times have changed. Or does it have to be one-to-one to stick?
One thing I'd recommend every sales dev manager here do is ask your reps how they prefer to get coaching. What you're going to find is that some people will prefer, whether that's email or over Zoom. Others are going to prefer group or one-on-one. But even with group and one-on-one, I think both are good, right? I like to have both. I love helping to create a culture of coaching where I can feel comfortable and hitting play on someone's call recording with the entire SDR team on the line, and even some of our AEs, and everyone listening to it, celebrating their wins, but also giving them tips on how to get better. If I can get to that level with a team, the one-on-one coaching is really effective as well. So I'd advocate you do both. It might be uncomfortable. It's going to be awkward the first time you do group coaching. Be prepared for silence when you ask for thoughts. Get ready for those crickets now. Power through it, because the next time you do it, it's going to get a little bit better. And by the 3rd or 4th time, there won't be as many crickets anymore, because you'll establish that culture.
That's awesome. All right, next one come in. How long did it take you to implement your trigger-based coaching.
Oh, gotcha. So probably referring back to the real-time notifications, what we call Yoda AI. That actually didn't take very long at all for me. I'm really, really fortunate that I didn't need to know any code to do that. I can go in, make the notification by selecting the keywords that I want it to go off of, and then identifying what battle card text I want to appear, and customizing it even for individual reps, right? Like think about when we were on sales floors, folks would have Post-it notes on their desks to remind them. I turn those into individual notifications. So just one SDR is getting it, not the whole group, to help push them and remind them about certain things that we're coaching on. So I love it because I can go out of a one-on-one, make a custom Yoda notification for, say, Dan, one of my newest reps, and help her out. So it didn't take long at all. Now the fine tuning part though is really, really critical to remember, Jeff, right? It's easy to get started, but you want to be careful. The classic example I bring up is we have a great case study with a company called WorkWave, and someone wanted to make a trigger for it. So they used the word work and wave as two separate words. The next thing you know, right, Yoda was going off on work every time. Not Yoda's fault, right? You had to combine the words into one group. So there's always a little bit of little things I need to tweak to really make it happen. But after that, it was smooth sailing for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. We talked about triggers based on things that are said, right? Like questions that might be having. What about things like that are more behavioral, like emotion, sentiment, voice energy, things like that?
God, I think one of the questions was what tool are we using on that front? And that's our conversation AI tool. And it's really important to track the tone and sentimentality of the opening part of your SDR, right? And I love being able to track how positive someone sounded on a cold call, because I'd have one SDR, Fiona, had this amazing opening talk track on my team. She did excellent. And then other people would try to copy it and literally say the same words, but they weren't having the same effectiveness. And they're like, Joe, what's going on? I'm literally saying the same thing. But then I look at their emotional metrics. Fiona's super positive, really engaging, and they weren't as engaging. So I could help coach them to tweak that tonality, and then they got the same level of success.
That's right. And this is a related question here that we have. It said, how does one solve for soft skill level issues? And I think that's what you're talking about, right? The example here from the question is, if someone gets defensive while handling objections, what kind of resources can be used to address that? Because you obviously don't have time to listen to, all the calls, or even, 10% of the calls that your reps might be making right now.
Oh, I love that question. That's a great one because, that goes back to my information overload point before, right? You can have all this data, but without that emotional metrics, it can be so overwhelming. So not only would I use that, but the other element that I did is we have some out of the box dashboards. One of them is called dials per opportunity created, right? It's a quick average of how many phone calls does it take for you to book a meeting. And what I noticed is at scale, when I look at my SDR team, the folks who had a really high level of dials per opportunity that they made, but a lot of conversations, right? They're actually talking to people. They were the ones who needed the soft skill coaching, right? And they needed me to get on a one-on-one and go through like, hey, you seem really defensive here. Or you know what? You really didn't navigate that objection and kind of got spooked and backed off when you should have like asked one more question, right? So I need some kind of reporting to give me an indicator of who's struggling on the soft skill issues. And I love using those dashboards to be able to identify, all right, who's really good at connecting with people and starting a conversation, but then they don't book a meeting. And when one number is really good and the other one's really bad, then I know it's exactly what that person was referring to with the soft skills.
That makes perfect sense. Well, I know we're just about, at time here. So in the chat, the link to this research is posted. So invite everybody to go download it. And for those of you who might just be listening and not be in chat, it's ringDNA.com/sales coaching. And, we invite everyone to get the full report and just thank everybody. These were great questions, had a great crowd today. Really appreciate the time, and feel free to reach out to Joe or myself with anything else. We're easy to find.
Yes, thanks guys. Thanks everyone for joining. See you at the next session.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone.